The judge said a date has not yet been set for next appearances. Until then, both women will remain locked up.
A mother calls 911 at 9 o'clock in the morning. She says her 8-year-old daughter is missing. She says the door was locked with a latch. She says her little girl has never run away before. Police show up within minutes. K-9 units sweep the building floor by floor. Helicopters circle the Georgia sky. Officers pull surveillance footage from the hotel, from the car wash across the street, from every single nearby business they can find within a half-mile radius. And they find absolutely nothing. No footage of the girl leaving. No trace of her in the parking lot. No sign that she walked out of that room at all. No open doors caught on camera. No small figure moving through a hallway. Nothing. But here's where the story stops being about a missing child. The medical examiner's report comes back, and it shows that this little girl, this 8-year-old who supposedly wandered out of a locked hotel room in the middle of the night, had already been dead for 2 full days before that 911 call was ever made. She was never missing. She was never out there somewhere, scared and alone in the Georgia cold, waiting to be found. She was never hiding. She never ran. Nobody took her. There was no stranger. There was no abduction. There was no mystery about where she was. She had been in that hotel room the entire time, alive only up to a certain moment. And the people who called for help, the people who stood in front of news cameras and told the world they were desperate to find her, the people who let K-9 units and helicopters and dozens of volunteers spend days searching through freezing temperatures, those people knew exactly where she was the entire time. This is the story of 8-year-old Amari Hall, a little girl from Gwinnett County, Georgia, who loved cooking with her grandmother, who wore rainbow sneakers that lit up when she walked, who called her grandmother Gigi, who was gentle and bright and full of the kind of joy that people remember long after a child has left the room, and whose final hours, the most horrific hours of her short life, were captured on video by the very people who were supposed to protect her. Stay with me, because this one is going to shake you to your core. Before we go any further into this story, I want to take just a second. Drop your city in the comments right now and tell me what time it is where you are. I always want to know who is sitting with me through these stories. Whether you are watching from Atlanta or Los Angeles, from Chicago or a small town nobody outside your county has ever heard of, drop it below. I read every single comment, and I genuinely want to know. Go ahead. I will keep going. Her full name was Nicole Amari Hall, but she had gone by Amari for as long as anyone could remember. It was the name she chose for herself, the name that felt like hers, and the people who truly loved her used it without question and without hesitation. Her grandmother Barbara, the woman Amari called Gigi, will tell you that describing Amari is one of the hardest things she has ever had to do. Not because she cannot find the words, but because no combination of words has ever felt like enough. She will tell you that Amari had the brightest smile she had ever seen on a child, the kind of smile that changed the energy of a room the moment it appeared, the kind that made you feel, without knowing exactly why, that everything was going to be okay. Amari loved being in the kitchen. That was her space. From the time she was small enough to need a step stool to reach the counter, she wanted to be in there, next to Barbara, learning how things were made, watching how flavors came together, asking questions that were sharper than you would expect from a child her age. Cooking with Gigi wasn't just an activity for Amari. It was a ritual, a language between two people who understood each other deeply. Those hours in the kitchen together were the kind that stay with a grandmother forever, not just as memories, but as something that lives in the body, that surfaces when you least expect it. That makes the loss feel physical in a way that nothing else quite does. She loved dressing up. She was curious about the world. She picked up on things, moods, changes in routine, the way adults were behaving, in ways that surprised the people around her. And despite having autism, despite needing daily medication to support her stability and her routine, Amari was sharp, keenly observant, the kind of child who missed very little and remembered everything. She was devoted to her younger brother Jakari and her 6-year-old sister Zaire in the way that only certain children are, not because someone told her to be, but because it was simply who she was. She checked on them. She was gentle with them. She was the kind of older sibling who makes the younger ones feel safe just by being in the same room. This was Amari. This is who she was. And I want you to hold onto that picture as clearly as you can, because this story is about to take you somewhere very dark. And it matters. It really matters that you know exactly who was lost. Amari lived with her two younger siblings, her mother Brittany Hall, who was 27 years old at the time, and Brittany's girlfriend, a 29-year-old woman named Celeste Owens. Brittany and Celeste had been in a relationship for several years. They had briefly separated at some point and reconnected, and by the time this story begins, they had been living together as a family unit for long enough that the children called Celeste Dad. That detail, small as it seems, tells you something about how established this dynamic had become, how normalized, how much a part of the daily structure of these children's lives Celeste had made herself. For the 3 months leading up to that Sunday morning in November, all 5 of them had been living together in a room at Hometown Studios, an extended-stay hotel on Peachtree Corners in Gwinnett County, Georgia. It was not a temporary situation the way extended-stay hotels sometimes are. It had become their home, their address, the place the children ate and slept and spent their days. And the children were being homeschooled, which meant they were not going out to a school building every morning. They were not interacting with teachers who might notice a bruise or a change in behavior. They were not spending time with other children who might say the wrong thing in front of an adult. They were in that room, largely cut off from the outside world, in a situation of almost total isolation that nobody around them fully understood until it was far too late. Neighbors at the hotel would later say they barely even knew there were children in that room, almost never saw them outside, almost never heard them. The kind of invisibility that, in retrospect, is one of the most chilling details of this entire case. Because when children disappear from public view entirely, when they are removed from schools, kept inside, shielded from any outside contact, it is almost never because things are going well behind that door. And Amari's grandmother Barbara knew something was wrong. She had been trying to reach the children for months, calling Brittany's number, sending messages, getting no response, not knowing which city they were in, which hotel, which room. She did not know where her grandchildren were living. She carried that uncertainty with her every single day, a low, persistent dread that she could not shake, and could not resolve, and could not explain away no matter how hard she tried. On Sunday morning, November 20th, at 9 a.m., the phone rang at the Gwinnett County Police Department. The caller was Brittany Hall. She said her daughter was gone. She said the last time she saw Amari was sometime between midnight and 1 in the morning. She had checked on her, seen her in the room, and everything seemed fine. She said she locked the hotel room door with the latch before going to sleep, the kind of lock that requires you to be inside the room to engage it, and that cannot be opened from the outside without a key. She said when she woke up, the door was slightly ajar, and Amari was not there. She told the dispatcher that before calling 911, she had already spent significant time searching the entire building on her own, walking the hallways, going outside, checking the parking lot, circling the property, and she found nothing, not a trace. She told them Amari had autism and needed her daily medication. She told them her daughter had never done this before, had never left on her own, had no history of wandering or running away. And then, and this part is worth paying close attention to, she added something. She said that despite all of that, she was holding on to hope, because Amari was really, really intelligent, really smart. She kept saying that, emphasizing how observant her daughter was, how aware of her surroundings, how capable of understanding what was happening around her. It almost sounded like Brittany was building a case, in that very first phone call, for how Amari could have gotten out of that room on her own, establishing a framework before anyone had even started asking hard questions. She also told the dispatcher something that she may not have thought through completely. She said that if Amari had left the room herself, she probably would not have closed the door behind her, because the latch makes noise when it closes, and the sound would have woken everyone up. Think about that for a second. She is explaining, in the same breath, both why she believes Amari could have left, and why the physical evidence of the door being open is consistent with that theory. Every detail was accounted for. Every loose end had a small, plausible explanation attached to it. Celeste's story was different. She said she had not been at the hotel that night at all. She told investigators she had gone out to spend time with her sister and then ended the evening at her grandmother's house. She said she came back around 4 in the morning and went straight to bed without looking in on the children because she was tired and just wanted to sleep. And she said the first thing she knew about Amari being gone was when Brittany woke her up, screaming. Within hours of that call, the search was everywhere. Local media picked up the story quickly. Gwinnett County put out every detail they had. 8 years old, African American, approximately 4 feet 10 inches, around 80 pounds, last seen wearing a blue jacket with Tweety Bird on it, blue and white pajama pants, glasses, and rainbow light-up sneakers. Those sneakers, the kind that flash with color at the heel every time a foot hits the ground, the kind designed to be noticed, the kind that would be impossible to miss if that child walked through a parking lot, past a camera, down a hallway, across a street. K-9 units arrived on scene and immediately began working the area around the hotel. A helicopter swept above, covering ground that officers on foot could not reach. Volunteers from Alpha Team K-9 Search and Rescue showed up and began coordinating with police. Officers went room by room through the entire hotel, knocking on doors, asking questions, checking spaces that a small child might have slipped into. They searched the wooded sections behind and around the building. They canvassed local businesses. They checked drainage areas, dumpsters, laundry rooms, stairwells. Every corner of every floor of that building was examined.
We had gotten from Brittany Hall and also her partner, Celeste Owen. We compared those statements with evidence that we gathered and recognized that those statements were indeed false. Our investigation transitioned from a missing person case to indeed a homicide case. Within the next several hours, we will charge Celeste Owen with felony murder in connection with the death of Amari Hall. Additionally, Brittany Hall will be charged with concealing the death of another. We will continue to also investigate her role in this.
Surveillance footage was collected from every available source: the hotel's own camera system, the car washed directly across the street, a nearby business, additional cameras in the surrounding area. Investigators sat down and went through all of it methodically, frame by frame, timestamp by timestamp, looking for any moment where an 8-year-old girl in a blue jacket and light-up sneakers appeared on screen. She did not appear anywhere. Not leaving the building. Not in the parking lot. Not on the street. Not in any direction. There was no footage of Amari Hall walking out of Hometown Studios on her own or with anyone else at any point during that night. At the 4:30 mark on Sunday afternoon, Gwinnett County Police held a press briefing. Sergeant Jennifer Richter told reporters they had no significant leads. She said there were no signs of abduction, but they also could not explain where the child had gone. She noted that Brittany had only recently moved to the area and had no real network of family or friends nearby, which meant there was no obvious place Amari could have gone even if she had wanted to leave. She told the media they were doing everything possible, that with the public's help and all available resources, they were confident they would be able to find her. It was cold that night. Temperatures dropped below freezing across Gwinnett County, and that detail became part of every news report. An 8-year-old girl with autism, no warm clothes beyond what she had on, no medication, somewhere out in a Georgia night that was getting colder by the hour. The urgency in every update from police was real and it was heavy, because as far as the public knew, as far as almost everyone knew, this was a child who needed to be found. At the 24-hour mark, without any meaningful leads, and with a growing sense that something about this case was fundamentally wrong, detectives brought in the homicide unit. That decision was not announced to the public immediately, but inside the investigation, the shift had already happened. This was no longer just a missing child case. The questions being asked were different now. The evidence being sought was different. The conversations being had with Brittany and Celeste were moving in a completely different direction. And inside that interrogation room, things were already coming apart. Before we go further, I need you to do something real quick. If this story has you locked in right now, if you have not moved since you started watching, hit the like button. Just press it. It takes 1 second, and it tells YouTube that this story deserves to be in front of more people. More eyes on Amari's story means her name keeps being spoken. That matters. Okay, back to it. Celeste was brought in for questioning, And the first thing investigators noticed was that her timeline could not hold still. Every time they tried to anchor her to a specific moment. What time did you leave? Where exactly did you go? When did you get back? The answer shifted. She said she left in the morning to go to the store. Then she left again. When was the second time? She couldn't say exactly. Was it before or after dark? She thought it was getting toward night. After 5? Probably. She went to her sister, then her grandmother. When did she get back? Around 4. Maybe 4 or 5. Actually, she thought maybe 2 a.m. No, wait, 2 p.m. She caught herself. Started over. Said she was just confused, just discombobulated, just tired. That she couldn't give exact times because everything had blurred together. Detectives let her talk. They took notes. They asked the same questions again in a different order. They circled back. They gave her space to contradict herself, and then gently, precisely, walked her back through what she had just said and waited. And then they told her what they had found. They had checked on Celeste's alibi, the grandmother, the sister, the people she said she spent that night with. Investigators had already made contact with them, and those family members had not seen Celeste in several months. Not that night. Not recently. They did not know where she had been. There was no evening at grandmother's house. There was no time with her sister. That entire story was fabricated, and it was the kind of lie that fell apart the moment anyone made a single phone call to verify it. Detectives also confronted Celeste with what the cameras had and had not shown. Brittany had told police she spent a long stretch of time searching the hotel building and the surrounding parking lot before calling 911. She had been specific about it, going up and down, circling the property, checking every area she could think of. But the cameras that covered that building and that parking lot did not show Brittany doing any of that. She was not on any of those recordings during the time she claimed to have been searching. She simply was not there. And Amari, the child who supposedly left on her own in the middle of the night, was not visible on a single frame of footage from the hotel or the surrounding area. Not any hour, not in any direction, not with anyone. An 8-year-old child in light-up shoes did not walk out of that building. The cameras confirmed it with the kind of certainty that does not leave room for alternative explanations. When detectives pushed Celeste on what she thought had really happened to Amari, she did what people do when they are trying to sound genuinely worried, while being careful not to say anything that can be used against them. She said she thought Amari had probably run away. She said she thought someone might have taken her. She said she didn't know what was going through that little girl's mind. She said she was still getting to know her, still trying to build a relationship with her, still learning her trust. She said Amari would sometimes tell her to leave her alone when she was upset, but would come back an hour later and apologize. She presented a picture of a normal family dynamic with the normal friction of a blended household. But detectives had something else now, something they had not yet shown her. While Celeste sat in that room, investigators had gotten access to her phone, and what they found on that phone changed everything about how this case was understood.
The court does hereby sentence you as follows. Count 1, malice murder. You are hereby sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Count 7 merges with count 3. 7 into 4. Count 6 merges into count 3, and count 5 merges to count 2. Counts 2, 3, and 4 are vacated by operation of law. On the remaining counts, counts 8 through 18, and counts 19 and 21, the court does hereby sentence you to consecutive 235 years. So life without parole plus 235 years. You will never see the light of day to perpetrate this type of behavior, cruelty, and evilness upon another.
Dozens of videos, recorded over time, showing both women, Brittany and Celeste, repeatedly beating and physically abusing the children. Not a single incident caught on video by accident. Video after video after video. Documented, saved, kept on a phone that Celeste had been carrying around with her while standing in a hotel parking lot talking to reporters, while sitting across from detectives, asking why anyone would think she could possibly be involved. The search history on that same phone told a story that investigators would later describe as a methodical, premeditated preparation for exactly what had happened. In the days before Amari was reported missing, Celeste had searched what to do when a child won't listen, why children run away, lakes nearby, how street drainage systems work, how to report a missing person, and she had access to U-Haul customer account. On November 19th, the day investigators believe Amari was killed, surveillance cameras captured Celeste at a U-Haul location, renting a small cargo van. By 8 o'clock that evening, she was already waiting outside for an Uber. Cell phone location data, combined with tracking information from the van, mapped out a route that left Gwinnett County and traveled approximately 15 miles away to a wooded area near Stone Mountain Freeway in DeKalb County. Investigators knew before they got there what they were going to find, but before they went anywhere, something else happened that cracked the case open in a way that no piece of technology could have managed on its own. Amari's 6-year-old sister Zaire, a child who was herself covered in bruises, told investigators that Celeste had taken Amari to somewhere she called the Bad Kids Hospital. She said she watched Celeste take her sister away. She said her sister was not coming back. I want you to stop for just 1 second here. Take a breath. What is the weather like where you are right now? I always think about who is watching these stories at midnight, at 2 in the morning, when the house is quiet and the weight of something like this really settles in. Drop it in the comments. Just the weather and your city. Let's see who's out there with me tonight. Okay, I have to finish this. When investigators confronted Celeste with what Zaire had said, that she had told her sister Amari was going to the Bad Kids Hospital, Celeste had an answer ready. She said it was something she used to say to manage Amari's behavior, that when Amari acted out, she would threaten to send her to this place. She framed it as a parenting technique, something she made up to get compliance. She said Amari would behave for a few hours after hearing it, and then things would calm down, and everything would be fine. But Zaire had not just repeated a phrase she had heard before. Zaire had said she watched her sister being taken, and Zaire was covered in bruises. At some point during the investigation, the pressure on Brittany became something she could no longer hold. She broke. She told investigators she knew where Amari was. She told them it was Celeste who had killed her daughter, that she herself had known, that she had helped conceal it. She said Celeste had delivered the fatal blow to Amari's head. She led detectives out of Gwinnett County, down a highway, to a stretch of wooded land near Stone Mountain Freeway in DeKalb County, about 15 miles from the hotel where they had all been living. What investigators found when they arrived at that location is something that the officers and detectives who were present have described in terms that make clear it affected them deeply, personally, in ways that do not simply go away when a case closes. Amari's body was partially buried in dirt and leaves. She was naked. She had been wrapped in 3 separate trash bags, tied with rope. Her small body was still partially visible through sections of the bags. She was 15 miles from the room she had been living in. She had been there for days. The medical examiner's findings were thorough, and they were devastating. Multiple skull fractures, multiple rib fractures, a ruptured liver, significant internal bleeding, cuts on her hands, injuries consistent with a child trying to protect herself, trying to shield herself from blows. The blunt force trauma was so severe that her liver had been compressed directly against her spine. Something had struck this child's body with tremendous, repeated, deliberate force. She weighed 54 pounds. At 8 years old, Amari should have weighed somewhere around 80 pounds. She weighed 54. She was 30 pounds underweight for her age. The medical examiner used a specific clinical term to describe the totality of what had been done to her body over time, battered child syndrome, and the examiner confirmed what the timeline of the investigation had already begun to suggest. Amari Hall had not died the morning of the 911 call. She had not died in the hours before it. She had been dead for approximately 2 full days before Brittany Hall picked up the phone and told a dispatcher that she had woken up and her daughter was gone. 2 days. Every hour of searching. Every K-9 unit. Every helicopter pass. Every volunteer who came out in freezing temperatures because they believed a child needed to be found. Every neighbor who checked their yard. every business owner who handed over their security footage, every officer who walked those hallways and those woods and those parking lots. None of it was ever a search for a living child. It was always something else. Brittany Hall was taken into custody and charged. Celeste Owens was charged with felony murder, concealing a death, making false statements to law enforcement, and 7 separate counts of cruelty to children, each count representing a distinct, documented act of abuse. 7 counts, each one its own event, each one its own horror. At their first court appearance, both women stood before a judge. Neither was granted bond. The judge made clear they would remain in custody. The room was tense and quiet in the way courtrooms get when the weight of what is being discussed is too heavy for any normal sound to survive in it. And Celeste, according to people who were present in that courtroom, was at one point laughing while signing paperwork, in a room where the details of what had been done to an 8-year-old child were being formally laid out on the record. Laughing. That detail spread quickly, and for everyone who heard it, it landed the way certain things land. Not a shock exactly, but as a kind of grim confirmation, a window into something. It would be 3 years before Celeste Owens went to trial. 3 years is a long time. Cases fade. Public attention moves on. But for the people connected to this one, Barbara, the investigators, the prosecutors, the children who survived, it did not fade. Every detail had only become more embedded, more permanent, more impossible to set down. When the trial finally began, Celeste faced a long and serious list of charges: intentional murder, felony murder, aggravated battery, aggravated assault, multiple counts of cruelty to children, concealing a death, and making false statements to law enforcement. Her defense attorney argued that she had not delivered the fatal blow, that the evidence was being misread, that the prosecution's narrative was an oversimplification of a complicated situation. His strategy was to challenge the interpretation of the evidence and create enough doubt to separate Celeste from direct responsibility for Amari's death. The prosecution was ready for that argument. More than ready. The lead prosecutor stood before the jury and delivered a closing statement that people in that courtroom still talk about. She told them that the defense's focus on who delivered the final blow was a distraction, a deliberate misdirection, because for Amari Hall, there was no single fatal blow. Every single blow was fatal. Every single one. Because of battered child syndrome. Because of what sustained, repeated physical abuse does to a child's body over time. The accumulated damage. The injuries stacked on top of earlier injuries that never fully healed. The internal systems of a small body pushed past every limit it had. Each act of violence against Amari contributed to her death. Each one was part of the same process that ended her life. She told the jury that it does not matter who pulled the trigger. It does not matter who delivered the blow that was technically last in the sequence. They did this together. And today, she said, is Amari's day. Zaire testified. She was small and composed on that stand in a way that no child should ever have to be. She described sleeping directly on the cold floor of the hotel room, without blankets, being made to face the wall for hours in silence, without moving, without speaking, without any ability to distract herself or find any relief from it. Toys were not allowed. Warmth was not allowed. Any expression of childhood, of being a child, of needing comfort, of wanting to play, was treated as something inappropriate and unwanted. She described other things too. Things that made adults in that courtroom go still and silent. Things that were difficult to hear even for people whose professional lives required them to regularly encounter the worst of what human beings do to each other. And Zaire sat there, small and precise and heartbreakingly brave, and she said them clearly. She did not fall apart. She did not lose her composure. She spoke with a steadiness that several people in the courtroom described afterward as one of the most affecting things they had ever witnessed. A child who had survived things that would break most adults, sitting on a witness stand and telling the truth about them. Barbara testified too. And where Zaire was steady, Barbara was sincere in a way that carried its own kind of devastation. She told the court that she had no idea abuse had been happening, that she found out the same way the rest of the world did, through news reports, like an outsider, like someone who had no connection to those children at all. And she said that the so-called behavioral problems Brittany had been describing for years, the challenges, the acting out, the issues that were used to explain and contextualize and quietly justify so much, were simply not true. She said that clearly and directly, and without hesitation. She said that when Amari lived with her, that child went to school. She thrived. She was kind. She was well-mannered. She was curious and engaged and easy to be around. There was nothing defiant about her, nothing aggressive, nothing that required the kind of discipline that was later described in court. She was a child who connected easily with others, who loved learning, who was the kind of person people spoke about with warmth and genuine affection. And then, at the end of 2020, the children went back to live with Brittany. Barbara did not agree with that decision. She made her concerns known, but she had no legal authority to stop it. She had to watch them go. And from that point forward, the wall came down completely. Calls went unanswered. Messages disappeared. Months passed. Then more months. She did not know where they were. She did not know what was happening to them. She just knew. The way grandmothers sometimes know things without being able to point to a specific reason, that something was wrong, that the silence was not normal, that unanswered calls from a daughter about her grandchildren were not nothing. She was right, and she will spend the rest of her life knowing she was right, and that she could not get to them in time. In December 2024, after a long and emotionally grinding trial, the jury returned its verdict. Guilty. On every single count. The courtroom absorbed the words in silence, the kind of silence that is not just the absence of sound, but the presence of weight, of everything that had been said in that room over the course of the trial, of every piece of evidence, every photograph, every video, every word from Zaire on that stand, every word from Barbara, every expert testimony about what battered child syndrome looks like in the body of a child and what it means about the months and months that preceded a death. Judge Angela Duncan addressed Celeste Owens at sentencing. Her voice was controlled. Every word was measured, and she said it directly, without softening it, without any of the procedural distance that courtrooms sometimes provide. You will never see the light of day to perpetrate this type of behavior, cruelty, and evilness upon another person. Life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus 235 years, 235 additional years. A number that sounds almost abstract until you understand what it represents. Every charge, every count, every documented act of abuse stacked into a sentence that reflected the full scope of what had been done and the full determination of the court that it would never happen again. Not by Celeste Owens. Not to anyone. Brittany Hall did not go to trial at the same time. The cases were separated after Brittany shifted all blame onto Celeste, attempting to reframe her own role, to present herself as someone who was controlled, who was afraid, who was not the driving force behind what happened to her daughter. In September 2025, after years of denying direct responsibility, Brittany entered a guilty plea. Felony murder, 11 counts of child cruelty, concealing the death of another person, making false statements to law enforcement. She was sentenced to life in prison. One of the lead prosecutors, speaking after the final sentencing, did not use formal or measured language. They said, "What we saw is something you can never forget. What we heard during this trial is something that can never be erased. This is the most horrific child-related case I have ever seen in my career. This mother failed to protect her children and instead became part of the abuse, and it ended in the death of her daughter. We continue to pray that her children can recover from what they went through and that this verdict can bring at least some sense of relief to them and their family." Those words came out slowly, deliberately, with the weight of someone who had spent years living inside the details of this case and who still had not found a way to put them down entirely. There is one more thing I want to tell you, something that matters. Amari's brother and sister, Jakari and Zaire, are no longer in the care of social services. According to the information available, they are now living with Barbara, with Gigi, in a home that is safe, in a home where the phone gets answered, in a home where someone checks on them at night not to count them, but to make sure they are warm and comfortable and okay. It is a new chapter in their lives, and it is fragile, and it is hard-earned, and it is real. They survived. In a situation where their sister did not, they survived. and that matters more than I know how to express. But the scars from what they went through, the ones on the outside and the ones you cannot see, do not heal because a verdict is read. They do not disappear because a sentence is handed down. They become part of a person. They shape the way that person moves through the world, the way they trust or don't trust, the way they respond to conflict and comfort and kindness. Jakari and Zaire will carry what they lived through for the rest of their lives, and they will carry it alongside the memory of a sister they watched being taken away in the middle of the night while a 6-year-old tried to make sense of where she had gone. Barbara said in court, "I will never get to see her play sports. I will never teach her how to drive. I won't even see her go to prom. I won't get to do the things grandmothers are supposed to do with their granddaughters. My heart is shattered into a million pieces, and I haven't been able to put them back together. And I don't think she ever fully will. I don't think that kind of loss ever becomes something a person finishes grieving. You just learn to carry it differently over time. You learn to function around the shape of it, but it stays." This case was flagged. Social services had contact with this family in 2015, in 2017, in 2021, 3 separate investigations, 3 separate opportunities to intervene, and 3 times. The conclusion was that there was no confirmed abuse, no grounds for removal, no evidence strong enough to act on. A representative from the Department of Human Services stated after the case became public that none of those prior investigations had produced findings that justified formal intervention at the time, that based on the information they had, there was no reason to believe the children were in immediate danger. That statement landed differently after everything else became known, and it should. Not because the individual caseworkers who showed up to those checks were negligent. The details of what was happening in that room were hidden deliberately and carefully by people who had thought about how to hide them. But because systems that are supposed to protect children failed to protect this one, and that failure deserves to be acknowledged directly, honestly, and without deflection. Every child deserves safety. Every child deserves warmth and care, and a home where they are protected rather than harmed. Every child deserves adults who are not just present in their lives, but who actually see them, who notice when something is wrong, who ask the right questions, who take the answer seriously. Amari Hall deserved all of that. She deserved a kitchen to grow up in, cooking beside her Gigi. She deserved to learn how to drive and go to prom and grow into whoever she was becoming. She deserved a future, a full, long, ordinary, extraordinary future filled with all the small moments that make up a life. She deserved a completely different story than the one she got, and the people who were supposed to give her that story chose otherwise. If this case moved you, if Amari's name means something to you now, share this video. Not for the numbers, not for the algorithm. Share it because her name deserves to keep being spoken, because children like her deserve to be remembered as people, not just cases, and because awareness, real, honest, unflinching awareness of how this happens and why, is one of the only things that gives a story like this any meaning at all. Subscribe to Crime Motives if you have not already. Leave a comment and tell me what part of this case stayed with you. Tell me what you were thinking. I want to hear from you. And when you are ready, the next story is right there waiting. I will see you in it.